So I'm going to set it up, and then I want you to talk about it. And
Okay.
just kind of just share with us what you discovered as you went into it.
Yes.
And you've heard Tino's story, but I'm going to somewhat repeat it, and we'll have him here live. He wasn't feeling well this morning. He sent me a long text. He said, it's not COVID. Okay. I'm glad it's not
made
COVID.
that clear.
So my friend, Tino, ends up getting really sick, which I had no idea about. I think back in June or July of 2020. And he goes in, he has to go to the emergency room. And next thing you know, he's in a coma. He's got family members calling people, ex-wives, inviting people to the hospital because it's time to say goodbye.
Yeah.
And he's in a coma for a while. He ended up being in the hospital for a really long period of time. He lost about, I think he told me like 40 pounds.
It was 40 pounds.
And he looked horrible. And it wasn't COVID-19. It was C. diff. And when I've been with Dr. Sabine, I've heard her mention, and she talks about C. diff and different things because it all ties into the gut.
Incredible.
Right? Gut bacteria again. And I hear her talking about it, but she talks so fast sometimes I can't really ask the question to help me have clarity.
Yeah.
That's why I asked you, like, before we have Tino on, let's learn a little bit more about it. Get people familiar with C. diff because they have no idea that this even takes place.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, a lot of people die.
Yeah, you can definitely die from it. Sometimes it can be just diarrhea, just kind of a mild, irritant like that, but you can certainly die from it for sure.
Okay, so what is it, Barbara?
So C. diff. So talk about bringing back my microbiology days. This was great. This is why, it's so interesting because as an undergrad, I took microbiology, and talk about when you learn about bacteria and viruses, it really just almost makes you a germaphobe when you realize all these things that are out there. But C. diff, it stands for Clostridium difficile. So Clostridium, it's the same.
Okay, well, I like C. diff best.
C. diff.
I won't get that one.
Well, you probably heard of Yeah, and it was interesting because I looked at the word. Obviously, difficile. It's like the Latin root of difficult, and I thought, I wonder if that meant because it causes so much havoc. But really, when I read the history into the name, they named it that because it was so hard to isolate it. Meaning, like when you're trying to find a discrete bacteria, I guess they had a hard time calling whatchamacallit, when they want to separate it, isolate it, and identify it. So that's what they named it. It was like back in 1935 when they first isolated it, 1935, from an healthy infant's feces, where they were able to isolate it. But it wasn't until 1978, though, that they were actually able to identify that particular bacteria to this diarrhea illness that people were acquiring typically in hospitals.
So was it is diarrhea like one of the major symptoms?
Yes,
okay.
One of the major symptoms. And it's actually this C. diff is probably one of the leading causes of hospital-acquired diarrhea.
Okay, so people are picking it up while they're in the hospital.
Predominantly in hospitals, long-term care facilities, nursing homes. And then oftentimes even the healthcare workers can have access to, or not access, but can be what they call colonized with it because they're in that environment.
So is it like airborne or what is it exactly?
So it's a bacteria. So it's really what's interesting about it is that I was reading a study, and they said that the average healthy adult, when they say colonized, meaning they have it in like their colon, it's pretty low. Most people don't have it. But people who are in those types of facilities like hospitals, people who are living in nursing homes, the percentage is quite higher, like 20% of those individuals have it. The problem with it ties back to all this gut bacteria is that, so it's in your gut, it's a bacteria. What makes it so, I guess, resistant to, being disinfected is it can actually create a spore. So it can create this, it's like a protein coat around it, which protects it. And so it's dormant at that stage, but it can withstand heat and cleaning and all kinds of things. So it can linger, which is why a lot of times in hospitals and places where people are sick and constantly getting exposed to different types of antimicrobial therapy, like antibiotics, they become resistant there, right? And so they're just sort of living there. And what happens then is, let's say you come into contact with it, you unknowingly maybe touch someone who's had it. It's usually with contamination, with like feces contamination or, you know, things like that. You get it and you ingest it. What they find.
What do you mean you ingest it? Okay. Because my mind went right to.
Yeah.
When I was talking to Tino, I said, so Tino, how do you think you attracted it? He said he went to this gathering at a bar. And he was shaking hands with a whole bunch of people. And he said that he believes that he picked it up that way. And I said, well, how'd you pick it up that way? He says, well, someone went to the restroom and they basically didn't wipe their ass as well as they should have.
Right.
And they probably didn't wash their hands. And I shook their hand and it was in the shape, I guess it was a spore. Right?
It's likely a spore.
Okay, so it's attached to him, and he just could have sat there and rubbed his eye.
Yeah.
Or could he give it to himself by wiping his own butt?
Well, that's yeah. So okay, so let me back up here. So typically, and they do have, there's typical like age, they say, that are more predominantly that have it,
older
like 65 people plus. But they are finding, I read a study, they are finding that that's changing. There is some increase in just, you know, communicable spreading, like from like kind of like what happened to him. Most of the time they see it's from like hospital stays and things like that. The interesting thing is that let's say wow. You are, but it ties a lot with being treated with antibiotics. So the issue here is that typically they start to see this C. diff infection when people are on some kind of antibiotic treatment, not necessarily for that, but for, let's say, something else. But that antibiotic creates this disruption in your microbiome. So not only is it getting rid of the bad bacteria that medication you're taking is supposed to kill, it's also killing a lot of the good bacteria that's in there. So if you are, let's say, you have a colony of, let's see, even the spores of C. diff in you, that can just be the right situation for those spores to then grow and multiply and then basically infect you. Because you can actually have the spores and not be infected with it. So that a lot of times, so how
do people spread it? Is it through touch?
It can be in, if you, let's say your feces, because it's in your colon, right? And so what happened to Tino, it's very likely if the person who was there maybe was a carrier of, which isn't, it's not very common. One of the studies I read, it's not common to spread it like that. It's more so like in the hospital settings and things, but it can happen.
And it's happening, saying it's happening more and more.
They're seeing an increase in those types of incidences. But basically, that's why even just with the common cold and all these other germs that we don't want to spread, hand washing, good hygienic practices, all that stuff is important. And so it could have been that maybe someone was in there or had been there and left a spore, which means that they didn't wash their hands after using the restroom, maybe touched handles or whatever, which happens in the hospital too. It can, at least. And then you touch it and you don't wash your hands, and then you have dinner and, you know, wipe your mouth and you unknowingly ingest it.
So the days of handshaking are over.
I know, no more. Just like this. What up?
even when Tino came in, and he's not someone who's concerned or like with masks, he came in, it was like fist bump, boom. Yep.
It's that's the scary thing is that you know, I've read that they're looking into, you know, there's been much research into a vaccine for it, because right now they actually treat C. diff with the antibiotic. That's one of the treatments, and so they realize it's like it doesn't make.
It's like I took some antibiotics. I already am killing my healthy bacteria. Now I get something
that
called C. diff that could kill me, and you give me more antibiotics to kill off more of my healthy bacteria.
Right. But there's also, they're looking into, was it the fecal transplant type therapy and vaccine therapy, and you know, I was also reading though that for the most part, healthy adults, you know, we have the immunoglobulin A and I think it's G that will fight off the toxins of this bacteria, and that's why, you know, a lot of us can be what they call you can be colonized with it. You can have it and you're not infected. You know, you don't get impacted by it. Your immune system is doing its job. It's keeping it at bay. It's when we disrupt it all and we happen to have, let's say we have exposure to it, then it's like the perfect storm. if we have a disrupted microbiome, we get exposed to it, and then, we're screwed. But
let me tell you, if people don't want to improve their gut bacteria, as we talk about it, if they're not interested in that, they're not interested in health. And there's a lot of people that have no idea. It's kind of like I've taught before. When my kids want regular pork bacon, when I get it, it's uncured, and it also is free of antibiotics. Yes. Now, I'll pay an extra $1 or $2 because I understand that. But I watch people go in who are probably health conscious, and they're buying chicken, beef, all kind of stuff, and they're not even concerned if it has antibiotics in it.
Because I think in their mind, and most people's minds are thinking antibiotics is a friend. I take it when I get sick, and it helps me. And it made me think about when I was looking back into this history about C. diff and thinking back when I took microbiology, and I loved that class. I think I might have told you, did I tell you that story when my first day of micro? One of the things that we do is, we had a lab with that class, and the teacher passed around the agar dish. So it's like a plastic petri dish.
Yes, I do remember that.
And so she did it more like a show and tell. She had everybody touch it. It's like, oh, this is what you're going to be working with this semester. But she, unknowingly to us, the class, she put it in an incubator and grew it for like 4 days to see what she could isolate off of all the germs of the people touching it.
Oh, man.
And she found some E. coli, so someone didn't wash their hands after using the restroom, or many people didn't, but she found all kinds of nasty stuff. And what was so interesting, though, now full circle, when I'm looking at this and I know more about microbiome, and and maybe it's just I don't think it's a newer science, but how much more powerful that class would have been had we also talked about microbiome, and it's that interplay of treating.
Well, that was how many, 20-something years ago?
So, yeah, it wasn't that long. No, it's kidding. No, it was.
I'm just saying, we're at a place now where still most people have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I was introduced to microbiome about 9-10 years ago, introduced to it. And then for like 4 or 5 years, every time I would see it, I read a little bit about it.
Yeah.
Then the last 3.5 years, you've heard me talk more and more about it. And I just go, I need to really understand this so we can help more people. And then when I just happened to meet Dr. Sabine maybe 2 years ago, I was at a party, had an amazing conversation with her.
I bet.
And then I just been on a mission to learn it. And now with C. diff, and thank you for sharing all of that, because, hey, wash your hands, people.
Right. Yeah, and there's some other things that they talk about how to help prevent just, having just disrupting your microbiome is, one is if, let's say, you do get prescribed antibiotics, is to take it per the doctor's or how the prescription's written. Sometimes you hear people who try to self-diagnose and kind of do things their own way, or halfway take their antibiotics or whatever it may be. The thing is, just if you have to take it, they say take it as directed and limit it if you can. If you don't have to, limit that type of use for sure. Definitely good hygiene. Definitely if you've ever had any kind of incidents where you've had, it's called antibiotic induced diarrhea type thing, or that if you've had that in the past, to let your your healthcare provider know, because maybe there's something that's kind of stewing in there,
right?
That you need to be aware of, and so that they know if they need to help you with anything, prescribe you with anything, that they're aware that maybe there's an issue there. They need to think about the fact that could you have some C. diff or maybe some, I don't know, sensitivity or.
Hey, I guess what we've learned with COVID is Michael Jackson years ago, who was known for wearing his mask. We get it. We laughed at one point, and now it's all caught up. He was ahead of his time.
He was, right? He had a glove on too, or at
That's
least
right.
one.
He had one. And then who was the gentleman? I think he's on America's Got Talent. Very Howie Mandel.
Howie Mandel. Oh yeah, he's like a germaphobe.
You're right. Well, not anymore.
Right.
I mean, he was fist bumping. He was wearing gloves. All of that, and so it's all caught up.
Yeah.
So,
You filthy
nothing.
Animals.
I mean, I believe I'm going to wear a mask here and there, depending on if I went to a baseball game. I don't know. Let's say 2 years from now, I may still be wearing a mask.
Right.
I'm definitely, I've always washed my hands,
Exactly.
but I am very mindful of it.
Heck yeah.
And I would be willing to bet that a lot of young kids that are growing up right now, aren't washing their hands the way we were taught to wash our hands. I bet there's a breakdown somewhere in there where the younger people today aren't as conditioned, if you will, to put washing my hands, washing my face before I go to bed, brushing my teeth. I mean, who knows? Some of that could be broken down as far as how younger parents are teaching the kids.
I mean, well, I guess it depends on how young too, because my son, he's young, but he's 16. So he's fully aware of the things that are going on, and he's definitely a lot more, I think, hygienically responsible, if is that a word? I don't know, than I was at that age.
Okay, well,
for sure.
there you go. Well,
but he's 16, you know.
And I see it with my kids, so maybe they're healthier than we are. We were.